to invite the President of the Constitutional Court of the Republic of Latvia, Mr. Aldis Laviņš. I also like to mention that the Constitutional Court of the Republic of Latvia has become a member of the Bureau of the World Conference of Constitutional Courts on proposal by the Constitutional Court of Lithuania. So we are very glad that at this conference, the European Constitutional Courts are represented by the Constitutional Court of the Republic of Moldova and by the Constitutional Court of the Republic of Latvia. Tribin ir jūsu, Mr. President, lūdzu.
Labas rytas, gerbiamosios ponios, gerbiamieji ponai, konferencijos dalyviai. Lietuvos konstitucinio teismo šeima. Latvijos Respublikas konstitucinio teismo šeimos vardu iš visos širdies sveikinu jūs Lietuvos Konstitūcijos priėmimo 30-ųjų metinių proga. Mes visada glaudžiai kartu ėjami pirmin. Būtent šiuo sudėtingu laiku mūsų draugystė ir savitarpio palaikymas kaip nikada buvo stiprus. These are my words congratulating my dear Lithuanian colleagues in this immensely important day for the court and for the whole Lithuanian nation. Dear colleagues, of course, it's a great pleasure to me to open this first session, which is devoted to the topic constitutional traditions and constitutional endurance. And let me start my presentation with some general remarks concerning constitutional endurance. And in my opinion, it might be interesting for you to hear some general information how long last constitution's life. So, the law understands constitutional endurance as the expected lifetime for a constitution, namely, how long it lasts between its adoption and its replacement by a new constitution. Constitutional endurance usually refers to the capacity of a constitution to resist attacks against its structure and underlying principles. Constitutions that are not resilient to such kind of attacks are more likely to be replaced. As a general matter, and as we all know, Constitution is intended for a continuous extended use because, as it was already mentioned, it provides rules for the future. Although, as we can see from comparative constitutional law research, sometimes the result could be quite opposite. Constitutional law scholars from the University of Chicago once calculated that the predicted lifetime for constitutions in the world does not exceed 20 years. It was quite surprisingly for me, no more than 20 years lifetime for a constitution across the globe. And let me share some examples. Some countries, such as Uruguay, have seen extended periods of stability followed by collapse and a series of short-lived constitutions. Other states, such as Mexico, at the beginning of independence, undertake a period of experimentation that results, luckily, in a stable constitutional regime. Still, others tend to rewrite their constitutions quite frequently and it may seem that they will never arrive at a stable framework of national law. But let me stress this one. In those countries where a constitution becomes the embodiment of a state system, the constitution may be endurant for a long period, as it is in the United States of America, where the constitution is in force more than 200 years. Yet, in Sweden, in the eyes of researchers, is a perfect example showing how some may opt to replace their constitution while the political situation is stable. So, dear colleagues, we can see the picture is really different across the world. And now, from this short guidance across the globe, let me turn to the experience of my country. And I believe that my appearance at this session regarding constitutional endurance is not a coincidence, because the Constitution of the Republic of Latvia, we call it Satversmes, as one of the oldest constitutions in Europe, is still in force. And by the way, this year it marks its 100th anniversary. At the time when the Latvian Constitution was drafted, members of the Constitutional Assembly emphasized that the drafting of each law, and in particular the constitutional law, should be viewed from the perspective of the future. This is required because the Constitution would determine the order of the state for generations to come. We must be wise and try to look into the ages ahead of us. These are words said by members of Constitutional Assembly in 1920s. Right now, today, I heard from Mr. Jozas Žilis the same approach, to be wise and to try to look into future to determine what kind of text should be drafted in order guarantee constitution sustainable and functioning for a long period. Quite the same approach as our founders took at that period. Quite the same approach. This was one aspect, to be wise and try to look into future. Second aspect, what I would like to underline, at the same time, the founders of the Constitution were inspired by the best experience of other European countries, choosing the drafting approach that may seem excessively concise when compared to the detailed, elaborated constitutions of today's. In 100 years, with just 15 constitutional amendments, its wording has not been subjected to substantial modifications. However, this does not mean that the foundation of the state are old-fashioned. The abstract terminology of the Constitution should not mean that the understanding of its term at the time of its adoption should be preserved and left unchanged. No, instead, the content of these terms may develop over the course of time without changes to its wording. In Latvia, the Constitution is perceived as a living organism that breathes the spirit of the time and takes legal conclusions from the contemporary system of law. Therefore, dear colleagues, the text of the Constitution, in our view, is flexible and it allows to interpret it dynamically in light of contemporary needs. It provides us with greater possibilities for interpretation, especially through decisions of the Constitutional Court. Hence, the role of the Constitutional Court is to precise the contents of constitutional norms in individual cases, instead of the application of the classical methods of interpretation. And let me add, in addition, with a concise constitutional document, many matters of constitutional law are regulated in greater details through legislative enactments, specifying various aspects of operating constitutional institutions and enforcing fundamental rights. In the forthcoming part of my speech, I will suggest several examples and aspects for discussions which could be considered as significant to the endurance and sustainability of the Constitution. First example. For example, Satversmes, within its unchanged 100-year-old architecture, also made it possible to find a way for state bodies to work remotely in unprecedented conditions of the COVID pandemic during the state of emergency. This issue was also examined by the Constitutional Court in the case of administrative territorial reform. According to the text of the Constitution, and I quote, "The Parliament shall hold its sittings in Riga, and only in extraordinary circumstances may it convene elsewhere." What did the court? Court was faced with the question whether those decisions taken by e-Parliament is or are legal. We were faced with such a question, and I just now read quite a short article, and this article, was drafted in 1922 and is quite precise at the first glance. Parliament shall hold its sittings in Riga, and only in extraordinary circumstances may it convene elsewhere. So, the court concluded that the arguments about holding the Parliament sessions on the e-Parliament, a tool for remote work, essentially refer not to the place where the Parliament session was held, but to the way the Parliament session was conducted. That is, to the implementation of democratic processes, opportunities on the e-Parliament platform. It means we focus not only on the one word, Riga, but on the whole procedure, whether e-Parliament provides all procedural rules, all procedural guarantees for deputies to realize their function. So, that's, of course, at the Constitutional Court in Latvia, we quite clearly understood that no one at that time, in 1920s, would ever imagine that after 100 years we will live in a so developed world where we can meet in Zooms, in e-platforms, and so on. So, and in my opinion, this ruling quite clearly shows how we can put into our Satversmes, our text of the Satversmes, which is quite concise, the modern content. And as I said, since our Constitution is so concise, this burden to fill with modern content lies on the shoulders of constitutional judges at the first front line. This is quite an obvious conclusion. This is the first example. Second example, as all we know that climate change, environmental conservations, and the green course are currently being discussed a lot in Europe and around the world. All of this actually is already included in our Constitution, both sustainability and responsibility towards future generations, and the right of every person to live in a favorable ecological environment. Third example, when fiscal discipline clauses were introduced in all European Union countries after the previous economic crisis, we had the opportunity to establish that this has already been stated in the Constitution since 1922. Namely, this is some sort of principle: you cannot spend state budget monetary irresponsibly. You can spend only when you can indicate where this money will actually be taken from. And next, and final, as an example, I finish with a feature which characterizes our unique constitution. Dear colleagues, during the 1990 and 1993 period, following the restoration of independence, Latvia did not adopt a new constitution to reflect the legal realities of that decade. Instead, we introduced the pre-war constitution, which had been suspended for over 50 years. By the way, no experience of this kind has ever been taken by another state. This leads, in my opinion, to the conclusion that the values represented in the Constitution may support and uplift an independent state through the ages, maintaining the doctrine of national continuity on a foundation of sustainability. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that the values incorporated in the Constitution also encourages us to look beyond horizon. The sustainability of the state is only feasible in a sustainable world. For this reason, I believe one of the keys to the constitutional endurance is this: the sustainability of values and the general principles underpinning the democratic state, as they are reflected in basic law, cannot be maintained within the framework of a national legal system alone. It is a process that requires comprehensive consideration and international dialogue. Therefore, our Satversmes is open to international and European Union law, and the result of the interpretation of the Constitution always should ensure the mutual harmony of these norms. Dear colleagues, with each round anniversary, an enduring, sustainable Constitution serves as a reminder of relevant, timeless values. They encourage us to think about today and about tomorrow, to act and to apply constitutional regulations in a way that contributes to the sustainability of our nations and the world in general. Te gyvuoja Lietuva, stipri jos konstitūcija ir konstitucinis teisma.
Paldies, Mr. President.